Hi everyone, welcome back to a new video. Today I'll be testing this GPU. This right here is an ATI Radeon HD4870. This card was released back in June of 2008 and is based on the terascale architecture. It comes clocked in at 800 MHz and it has 512 MB of GDDR5 VRAM, which comes clocked in at 950 MHz. It also has 800 shading units, 40 TMUs, 16 ROPs, and it supports up to DirectX 10. Let's find out what this GPU can still do today. First off, let's unbox this card. I bought this card used for 20 euros, which is around the price that this card goes for online. It was well packaged, so there's no chance that the postal service did any damage to this card. I then cleaned the GPU since I had to replace the thermal paste anyway. Here is a before and after of the cleaning. Now let's put the card back together again. This went very easy. Now it's time to have a look at the card itself. This card is cooled by this fan and it does its job well, as it didn't get any hotter than 73 degrees while testing. Here's how the fan sounds in idle, under load, and at full speed. For power, this card uses two 6-pin power connectors, and for video out, it uses two DVI ports and one S-Video port. Now let's put this card into my PC. This right here is also my testing system, and it features an Intel Core i7-3770K, 12GB of DDR3 RAM, and an ASUS Sabertooth Z77 motherboard. Time to find out if this card actually works. And yes, it does. So then it was time to wait for the PC to boot up and immediately install the drivers. This went smooth and easy. Let's run some benchmarks, starting with Userbenchmark. Userbenchmark showed that the CPU was performing below expectations, while the GPU was performing above expectations. In heaven, the card got an average FPS of 24.8 and a score of 625. The last benchmark that I ran was Performancetest. In Performancetest, the card got a score of 25 in the 2D mark and a score of 1413 in the 3D mark. Now let's test some games, starting with Minecraft. On low settings with a render distance of 12 chunks, this card got an average FPS of 86, with 1% loss of 35 FPS and 0.1% loss of 21 FPS. Minecraft is absolutely playable on this card. On the second to highest graphical settings in Roblox, this card got an average FPS of 60, with 1% loss of 44 FPS and 0.1% loss of 2 FPS, which makes Roblox absolutely playable. Freddy Fazbears Pizzaria simulator was also playable, only utilizing about 25% of the GPU. Ultimate Custom Night was also perfectly playable, utilizing only about 40% of the GPU. On the low preset, Euro Truck Simulator 2 was perfectly playable. The card managed to get an average FPS of 75, with 1% loss of 38 FPS and 0.1% loss of 1 FPS. Using low settings, Bus Simulator 12 was also playable. The card got an average FPS of 33, with 1% loss of 27 FPS and 0.1% loss of 16 FPS. CSGO was also perfectly playable. On low settings, the card got a max FPS of 496 in the benchmark, while usually hovering around 120 FPS. BeamNG Drive would not launch due to DirectX limitations. After turning the settings to the lowest and the resolution to 1366 by 768, Bus Simulator 16 was also perfectly playable. The card managed to get an average FPS of 51, with 1% lows of 16 FPS and 0.1% lows of 2 FPS. PC Building Simulator also ran fine. Using the lowest settings in the 1024 by 768 resolution, the card managed to get an average FPS of 48, with 1% lows of 6 FPS and 0.1% lows of 1 FPS, which means that this game is also playable on this card. Fortnite would launch, but it would crash in the loading screen. GTA would only run decent on the lowest settings in the 800 by 600 resolution. Using these settings, the card managed to get an average FPS of 44, with 1% lows of 12 FPS and 0.1% lows of 4 FPS. I also tried overclocking the card. Using a custom fan curve, this was the furthest I could push the card. A boost of 30 MHz on the core clock and a boost of 65 MHz on the memory clock. Trying Minecraft again, the average FPS went down to 68, with 1% lows of 38 FPS and 0.1% lows of 26 FPS. The average FPS went down, but overclocking did help a bit with the 1% and 0.1% lows. In Roblox, the performance boost was more visible. The average FPS and 0.1% lows stayed the same, but the 1% lows went up to 49 FPS. Euro Truck Simulator 2 didn't like the overclock. The average FPS went down to 58, with 1% lows of 29 FPS and 0.1% lows of 1 FPS. In PC Building Simulator, I could see a big performance boost. The average FPS went down to 44, but the 1% lows went up by 300% to 24 FPS, and the 0.1% lows went up by 1000% to 11 FPS. In GTA 5 there was a minor performance boost. The card now got an average FPS of 44, with 1% lows of 15 FPS and 0.1% lows of 5 FPS. Then it was time to uninstall the drivers and shut the PC down. Now, what do I think of it? In my opinion, this card is really nearing the end of its lifespan. For 20 euros, this card may be good in a budget build, but if you want to use this card daily, I wouldn't recommend it. Some games are already not supporting this card, and other games only run at very low resolutions. One thing that is impressive is just how long this card has held up. It was originally released in 2008, which means that this year it has turned 13 years old, and for a 13-year-old card, the games that this GPU could still run were pretty impressive. So yes, this card is still usable in 2021, but I would advise only really using it in pretty low budget builds. And with that, this video comes to an end. Thanks so much for watching, comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye!